Good evening and welcome back to Cecilia. I hope you've recovered from all 55 minutes of drama last night. Probably a slightly shorter episode tonight, and I hope you're all keeping warm. I mean keeping cool. It is very warm out there today. Chapter 7. An Anecdote. On the fourth day the house wore a better aspect. Delvile's fever was gone, and Dr. Lister permitted him to leave his room. A cough, however, remained, and his journey to Bristol was settled to take place in 3 days. Cecilia, knowing he was now expected downstairs, hastened out of the parlour the moment she had finished her breakfast, for affected by his illness and hurt at the approaching separation, she dreaded the first meeting, and wished to fortify her mind for bearing it with propriety. In a very few minutes Lady Honoria, running after her, entreated that she would come down. "For Mortimer," she cried, "is in the parlour, and the poor child is made so much of by its papa and mamma that I wish they don't half kill him by their ridiculous fondness. It is amazing to me he is so patient with them, for if they teased me half so much, I should be ready to jump up and shake them. But I wish you would come down, for I assure you it's a comical scene." "Your ladyship is soon diverted. But what is there so comical in the anxiety of parents for an only son?" "Lord, they don't care a straw for him all the time. It's merely that he may live to keep up this old castle, which I hope in my heart he will pull down the moment they are dead. But do come. It will really give you spirits to see them all. The father keeps ringing the bell to order 100 pair of boots for him, and all the greatcoats in the county, and the mother sits and looks as if a hearse and mourning coach were already coming over the drawbridge. But the most diverting object among them all is my Lord Derford. Oh, it is really too entertaining to see him. There he sits, thinking the whole time of his challenge. I intend to employ him all this afternoon in practising to shoot at a mark." And then again she pressed her to join the group, and Cecilia, fearing her opposition might seem strange, consented. Delvile arose at her entrance, and with tolerable steadiness she congratulated him on his recovery, and then, taking her usual seat, employed herself in embroidering a screen. She joined too occasionally in the conversation, and observed, not without surprise, that Delvile seemed much less dejected than before his confinement. Soon after he ordered his horse, and accompanied by Lord Derford rode out. Mr. Delvile then took Lord Ernolf to show him some intended improvements in another part of the castle, and Lady Honoria walked away in search of any entertainment she could find. Mrs. Delvile, in better spirits than she had been for many days, sent for her own work, and sitting by Cecilia, conversed with her again as in former times, mixing instruction with entertainment, and general satire with particular kindness, in a manner at once so lively and so flattering, that Cecilia, herself reviving, found but little difficulty in bearing her part in the conversation. And thus, with some gaiety and tolerable ease, was spent the greatest part of the morning. But just as they were talking of changing their dress for dinner, Lady Honoria, with an air of the utmost exultation, came flying into the room. "Well, ma'am," she cried, "I have some news now that I must tell you, because it will make you believe me another time, though I know it will put you in a passion." "That's sweetly designed, at least," said Mrs. Delvile, laughing. "However, I'll trust you, for my passions will not, just now, be irritated by straws." "Why, ma'am, don't you remember I told you when you were in town that Mr. Mortimer kept a mistress?" "Yes," cried Mrs. Delvile disdainfully. "And you may remember, Lady Honoria, I told you—" "Oh, you would not believe a word of it, but it's all true, I assure you. And now he has brought her down here. He sent for her about 3 weeks ago, and he has boarded her at a cottage about half a mile from the park gate." Cecilia, to whom Henrietta Belfield was instantly present, changed colour repeatedly, and turned so extremely sick she could with difficulty keep her seat. She forced herself, however, to continue her work, though she knew so little what she was about that she put her needle in and out the same place without ceasing. Meanwhile Mrs. Delvile, with a countenance of the utmost indignation, exclaimed, "Lady Honoria, if you think a tale of scandal such as this reflects no disgrace upon its relater, you must pardon me for entreating you to find an auditor more of the same opinion than myself." "Nay, ma'am, since you are so angry, I'll tell you the whole affair, for this is but half of it. He has a child here, too. I vow I long to see it, and he is so fond of it that he spends half his time in nursing it. And that, I suppose, is the thing that takes him out so much, and I fancy, too, that's what has made him grow so grave, for maybe he thinks it would not be pretty to be very frisky, now he's a papa." Not only Cecilia, but Mrs Delvile herself was now overpowered, and she sat for some time wholly silent and confounded. Lady Honoria then, turning to Cecilia, exclaimed, "Bless me, Miss Beverley, what are you about? Why, that flower is the most ridiculous thing I ever saw. You have spoilt your utmost work." Cecilia, in the utmost confusion, though pretending to laugh, then began to unpick it, and Mrs Delvile, recovering, more calmly, though not less angrily, said, "And has this tale of the honour of being invented solely by your ladyship, or had it any other assistance?" "Oh no, I assure you, it's no invention of mine. I had it from very good authority, upon my word. But only look at Miss Beverley. One would not think I had said she had a child herself. She looks as pale as death. My dear, I am sure you can't be well." "I beg your pardon," cried Cecilia, forcing a smile, though extremely provoked with her. "I never was better." And then, with the hope of appearing unconcerned, she raised her head, but meeting the eyes of Mrs Delvile fixed upon her face with a look of penetrating observation, abashed and guilty, she again dropped it, and resumed her work. "Well, my dear," said Lady Honoria, "I am sure there is no occasion to send for Dr Lister for you recover yourself in a moment. You have the finest colour now I ever saw, has she not, Mrs Delvile? Did you ever see anybody blush so becomingly?" "I wish, Lady Honoria," said Mrs Delvile with severity, "it were possible to see you blush." "Oh, but I never do. Not but what it's pretty enough too, but I don't know how it is, it never happens. Now Euphrasia can blush from morning to night. I can't think how she contrives it. Miss Beverley, too, plays it vastly well. She's red and white and red half a dozen times in a minute, especially," looking at her archly and lowering her voice, "if you talk to her of Mortimer." "No, indeed, no such thing," cried Cecilia with some resentment, and again looking up, but glancing her eyes towards Mrs Delvile, and again meeting hers, filled with the strongest expression of inquiring solicitude, unable to sustain their inquisition, and shocked to find herself thus watchfully observed, she returned in hasty confusion to her employment. "Well, my dear," cried Lady Honoria again, "but what are you about now? Do you intend to unpick the whole screen?" "How can she tell what she is doing," said Mrs Delvile with quickness, "if you torment her thus incessantly? I will take you away from her, that she may have a little peace. You shall do me the honour to attend my toilette, and acquaint me with some further particulars of this extraordinary discovery." Mrs Delvile then left the room, but Lady Honoria, before she followed her, said in a low voice, "Pity me, Miss Beverley, if you have the least good nature. I am now going to hear a lecture of 2 hours long." Cecilia, left to herself, was in a perturbation almost insupportable. Delvile's mysterious conduct seemed the result of some entanglement of vice. Henrietta Belfield, the artless Henrietta Belfield, she feared had been abused, and her own ill-fated partiality, which now more than ever she wished unknown even to herself, was evidently betrayed where most the dignity of her mind made her desire it to be concealed. I pause. Does she seriously think that Henrietta Belfield has had a baby? Like, in the past 2 months, and she hasn't noticed? Like, Cecilia, I love you, but come on. I know these Regency dresses. Well, she's not in Regency dresses. This is the 1780s. She's in, Georgian dress. There's no way you can hide a pregnancy in that. I mean, come on. Cecilia, use your wits. In this state of shame, regret, and resentment, which made her forget to change her dress or her place, she was suddenly surprised by Delvile. Starting and colouring, she busied herself with collecting her work, that she might hurry out of the room. Delvile, though silent himself, endeavoured to assist her, but when she would have gone, he attempted to stop her, saying, "Miss Beverley, for 3 minutes only." "No, sir," cried she indignantly, "not for an instant." And leaving him utterly astonished, she hastened to her own apartment. She was then sorry she had been so precipitate. Nothing had been clearly proved against him, no authority was so likely to be fallacious as that of Lady Honoria. Neither was he under any engagement to herself that could give her any right to manifest such displeasure. These reflections, however, came too late, and the quick feelings of her agitated mind were too rapid to wait the dictates of cool reason. At dinner she attended wholly to Lord Ernolf, whose assiduous politeness, profiting by the humour, saved her the painful effort of forcing conversation, or the guilty consciousness of giving way to silence, and enabled her to preserve her general tenor between taciturnity and loquaciousness. Mrs. Delvile she did not once dare to look at, but her son she saw seemed greatly hurt, yet it was proudly, not sorrowfully, and therefore she saw it with less uneasiness. During the rest of the day, which was passed in general society, Mrs. Delvile, though much occupied, frequently leaving the room and sending for Lady Honoria, was more soft, kind, and gentle with Cecilia than ever, looking at her with the utmost tenderness, often taking her hand, and speaking to her with even unusual sweetness. Cecilia with mingled sadness and pleasure observed this increasing regard, which she could not but attribute to the discovery made through Lady Honoria's mischievous intelligence, and which, while it rejoiced her with the belief of her approbation, added fresh force to her regret in considering it was fruitless. Delvile, meantime, evidently offended himself, conversed only with the gentleman, and went very early into his own room. When they were all retiring, Mrs. Delvile, following Cecilia, dismissed her maid to talk with her alone. "I am not, I hope, often," she cried, "solicitous or importunate to speak about my son. His character, I believe, wants no vindication. Clear and unsullied, it has always been its own support. Yet the aspersions cast upon it this morning by Lady Honoria, I think myself bound to explain, not partially as his mother, but simply as his friend." Cecilia, who knew not whither such an explanation might lead, nor wherefore it was made, heard this opening with much emotion, but gave neither to that nor what followed any interruption. Mrs. Delvile then continued. She had taken the trouble, she said, to sift the whole affair, in order to shame Lady Honoria by a pointed conviction of what she had invented, and to trace from the foundation the circumstances whence her surmises or report had sprung. Delvile, it seems, about a fortnight before the present time, in one of his morning walks, had observed a gipsy sitting by the side of the high road, who seemed extremely ill, and who had a very beautiful child tied to her back. Struck with the baby, he stopped to inquire to whom it belonged. To herself, she said, and begged his charity with the most pitiable cries of distress, telling him that she was travelling to join some of her fraternity, who were in a body near Bath, but was so ill with an ague and fever that she feared she should die on the road. Delvile desired her to go to the next cottage, and promised to pay for her board there till she was better. He then spoke to the man and his wife, who owned it, to take them in, who, glad to oblige his honour, instantly consented, and he had since called twice to see in what manner they went on. "How simple," continued Mrs. Delvile, "is a matter of fact in itself, and how complex when embellished. This tale has been told by the cottagers to our servants. It has travelled, probably gaining something from every mouth, to Lady Honoria's maid, and having reached her ladyship, was swelled in a moment into all we heard. I think, however, that, for some time at least, her levity will be rather less daring. I have not in this affair at all spared her. I made her hear from Mortimer himself the little story as it happened. I then carried her to the cottage, where we had the whole matter confirmed, and I afterwards insisted upon being told myself by her maid all she had related to her lady, that she might thus be unanswerably convicted of inventing whatever she omitted. I have occasioned her some confusion, and for the moment a little resentment, but she is so volatile that neither will last. And though with regard to my own family I may perhaps have rendered her more cautious, I fear with regard to the world in general she is utterly incorrigible, because it has neither pleasure nor advantage to offer that can compensate for the deprivation of relating one staring story or ridiculous anecdote." And then, wishing her good night, she added, "I make not any apology for this detail, which you owe not, believe me, to a mother's folly, but, if I know myself at all, to a love of truth and justice. Mortimer, independent of all connection with me, cannot but to everybody appear of a character which may be deemed even exemplary. Calumny, therefore, falling upon such a subject, injures not only himself but society, since it weakens all confidence in virtue and strengthens the scepticism of depravity." She then left her. "Ah," thought Cecilia, "to me at least this solicitude for his fame needs no apology. Humane and generous Delvile, never again will I a moment doubt your worthiness." And then, cherishing that darling idea, she forgot all her cares and apprehensions, her quarrel, her suspicions, and the approaching separation, and recompensed for everything by this refutation of his guilt, she hastened to bed and composed herself to rest. I spent some time this morning flicking through the remaining 500 pages and reacquainting myself with what happens, and I think the characterisation of the Delvile family, Papa, Mamma and their child, is really key to the development of the plot and the way Bernie takes it. So I hope you are paying attention to the family dynamics of this small and proud family unit, and the way the parents interact with each other and their relationship, and the kind of expectations and assumptions they make about their son is really key, and to think how those expectations and parental influences have affected the character and disposition of young Mortimer Delvile is really important. I think it's a change from Lord Orville, who exists kind of in a vacuum. He has this sister that seems of a totally different character to him. His parents are clearly dead. He's inherited his title. He's a man of total independence. And yet here in Delvale, we have this young man, I wonder at his age, probably mid-20s, 24, 25 perhaps. He is young, who is so totally wrapped up and dependent upon very strong-minded and forceful parents and their own dynamic and hopes and wishes and pride and prejudice, and how that's affected him, and it gives him a character development and a characterisation that I think we don't really have in Evelina. Lord Orville remains static and perfect. Delvile very much has his own struggles, and we see it all from Cecilia's point of view, but Delvile is going on his own journey in this story, and I think that's very good for him. You know, it's nice to have a hero's journey alongside the heroine's journey. It makes him more human, perhaps, than Orville was, even if it makes him also more imperfect. And again, as I've said before, it puts Cecilia and Delvile on a much more equal footing. They are two young people of intelligence and humanity who have their own problems that they've got to resolve with themselves as well as with each other. It's not a case of a sort of Cinderella story. It's something much more equal and much more relatable. You know, how in the world are these two intelligent people who can't communicate on any level whatsoever ever going to get together and come to an understanding? I mean, really, their communication lacks everything. But I just want this film so much. I want more people to read the book, I guess. I want to bring this to a wider audience. Chapter 8. A Conference. Early the next morning, Cecilia had a visit from Lady Honoria, who came to tell her story her own way, and laugh at the anxiety of Mrs. Delvile and the trouble she had taken. For, after all, continued she, what did the whole matter signify, and how could I possibly help the mistake? When I heard of his paying for a woman's board, what was so natural as to suppose she must be his mistress, especially as there was a child in the case. Oh, how I wish you had been with us! You never saw such a ridiculous sight in your life. Away we went in the chaise, full drive to the cottage, frightening all the people almost into fits. Out came the poor woman, away ran the poor man. Both of them thought the end of the world at hand. The gipsy was best off, for she went to her old business and began begging. I assure you, I believe she would be very pretty if she was not so ill. And so I dare say Mortimer thought too, or I fancy he would not have taken such care of her. Fie, Lady Honoria, will nothing bring conviction to you? Nay, you know, there's no harm in that, for why should not pretty people live as well as ugly ones? There's no occasion to leave nothing in the world but frights. I looked hard at the baby to see if it was like Mortimer, but I could not make it out. Those young things are like nothing. I tried if it would talk, for I wanted sadly to make it call Mrs. Delvile grandmamma. However, the little urchin could say nothing to be understood. Oh, what a rage would Mrs. Delvile have been in! I suppose this whole castle would hardly have been thought heavy enough to crush such an insolent brat, though though it were to have fallen upon it all at the blow. Thus rattled this light-hearted lady till the family was assembled to breakfast, and then Cecilia, softened towards DelVal by newly excited admiration, as well as by the absence which would separate them the following day, intended by every little courteous office in her power to make her peace with him before his departure. But she observed with much chagrin that Mrs Delvile never ceased to watch her, which, added to an air of pride in the coldness of Delvile that he had never before assumed, discouraged her from making the attempt, and compelled her to seem quiet and unconcerned. As soon as breakfast was over, the gentlemen all rode or walked out, and when the ladies were by themselves, Lady Honoria suddenly exclaimed, "Mrs Delvile, I can't imagine for what reason you send Mr Mortimer to Bristol." "For a reason, Lady Honoria, that with all your wildness I should be very sorry you should know better by experience." "Why then, ma'am, had we not better make a party and all go? Miss Beverley, should you like to join it? I am afraid it would be vastly disagreeable to you." Cecilia now again was red and white and white and red a dozen times in a minute, and Mrs Delvile, rising and taking her hand, expressively said, "Miss Beverley, you have 1,000 times too much sensibility for this madcap of a companion. I believe I shall punish her by taking you away from her all this morning. Will you come and sit with me in the dressing-room?" Cecilia assented without daring to look at her, and followed in trembling upstairs. Something of importance she fancied would ensue. Her secret, she saw, was revealed, and therefore she could form no conjecture but that Delvile would be the subject of the discourse. Yet whether to explain his behaviour or plead his cause, whether to express her separate approbation or communicate some intelligence from himself, she had neither time, opportunity, nor clue to unravel. All that was undoubted seemed the affection of Mrs Delvile. All that on her own part could be resolved was to suppress her partiality till she knew if it might properly be avowed. Mrs Delvile, who saw her perturbation, led immediately to subjects of indifference, and talked upon them so long and with so much ease, that Cecilia, recovering her composure, began to think she had been mistaken, and that nothing was intended but a tranquil conversation. As soon, however, as she had quieted her apprehensions, she sat silent herself, with a look that Cecilia easily construed into thoughtful perplexity in what manner she should introduce what she meant to communicate. This pause was succeeded by her speaking of Lady Honoria. "How wild, how careless, how incorrigible she is! She lost her mother early, and the Duke, who idolizes her, and who, marrying very late, is already an old man, she rules entirely. With him and a supple governess, who has neither courage to oppose her nor heart to wish well but her own interest, she has lived almost wholly. Lately, indeed, she has come more into the world, but without even a desire of improvement, and with no view and no thought but to gratify our idle humour by laughing at whatever goes forward." "She certainly neither wants parts nor discernment," said Cecilia, "and when my mind is not occupied by other matters, I find her conversation entertaining and agreeable." "Yes," said Mrs Delvile, "but that light sort of wit which attacks with equal alacrity what is serious or what is gay, is 20 times offensive, to once that is exhilarating, since it shows that while its only aim is self-diversion, it has the most insolent negligence with respect to any pain it gives to others. The rank of Lady Honoria, though it has not rendered her proud, nor even made her conscious she has any dignity to support, has yet given her a saucy indifference whom she pleases or hurts, that borders upon what in a woman is of all things the most odious, a daring defiance of the world and its opinions." Cecilia, never less disposed to enter upon her defence, made but little answer, and soon after Mrs Delvile added, "I heartily wish she were properly established, and yet, according to the pernicious manners and maxims of the present age, she is perhaps more secure from misconduct while single than she will be when married. Her father, I fear, will leave her too much to herself, and in that case I scarce know what may become of her. She has neither judgment nor principle to direct her choice, and therefore in all probability the same whim which one day will guide it will the next lead her to repent it." Again they were both silent, and then Mrs Delvile gravely, yet with more energy, exclaimed, "How few are there, how very few, who marry at once upon principles rational and feelings pleasant! Interest and inclination are eternally at strife, and where either is wholly sacrificed, the other is inadequate to happiness. Yet how rarely do they divide the attention, the young a rash, and the aged a mercenary. Their deliberations are never in concert, Their views are scarce ever blended, one vanquishes and the other submits. Neither party temporizes, and commonly each is unhappy. The time, she continued, is now arrived when reflections of this sort cannot too seriously occupy me. The errors I observed in others I would fain avoid committing, yet such is the blindness of self-love that perhaps even at the moment I censure them, I am falling without consciousness into the same. Nothing, however, shall through negligence be wrong. For where is the son who merits care and attention, if Mortimer from his parents deserves not to meet them? The expectations of Cecilia were now again awakened, and awakened with fresh terrors, lest Mrs Delvile from compassion meant to offer her services. Vigorously, therefore, she determined to exert herself, and rather give up Mortimer and all thoughts of him for ever, than submit to receive assistance in persuading him to the union. Mr Delvile, she continued, is most earnest and impatient that some alliance should take place without further delay, and for myself, could I see him with propriety and with happiness disposed of, what a weight of anxiety would be removed from my heart. Cecilia now made an effort to speak, attempting to say, "Certainly it is a matter of great consequence," but so low was her voice, and so confused her manner, that Mrs Delvile, though attentively listening, heard not a word. She forbore, however, to make her repeat what she said, and went on herself as if speaking in answer. "Not only his own, but the peace of his whole family will depend upon his election, since he is the last of his race. This castle and estate, and another in the north, were entailed upon him by the late Lord Delvile, his grandfather, who, disobliged by his eldest son, the present lord, left everything he had power to dispose of to his second son, Mr Delvile, and at his death to his grandson Mortimer. And even the present lord, though always at variance with his brother, is fond of his nephew and has declared him his heir. I also have one sister who is rich, who has no children, and who has made the same declaration. Yet though with such high expectations, he must not connect himself imprudently, for his paternal estate wants repairs, and he is well entitled with a wife to expect what it requires." Most true, thought Cecilia, yet ashamed of her recent failure, she applied herself to her work, and would not again try to speak. "He is amiable, accomplished, well educated, and well born. Far may we look and not meet with his equal. No woman need disdain, and few women would refuse him." Cecilia blushed her concurrence, yet could well at that moment have spared hearing the eulogy. "Yet how difficult," she continued, "to find a proper alliance. There are many who have some recommendations, but who is there wholly unexceptionable?" This question seemed unanswerable, nor could Cecilia devise what it meant. Girls of high family have but seldom large fortunes, since the heads of their house commonly require their whole wealth for the support of their own dignity, while on the other hand girls of large fortune are frequently ignorant, insolent, or low born, kept up by their friends lest they should fall a prey to adventurers. They have no acquaintance with the world, and little enlargement from education. Their instructions are limited to a few merely youthful accomplishments. The first notion they imbibe is of their own importance. The first lesson they are taught is of the value of riches, and even from their cradles their little minds are narrowed, and their self-sufficiency is excited by cautions to beware of fortune-hunters, and assurances that the whole world will be at their feet. Among such should we seek a companion for Mortimer? Surely not. Formed for domestic happiness and delighting in elegant society, his mind would disdain an alliance in which its affections had no share. Cecilia, colouring and trembling, thought now the moment of her trial was approaching, and half mortified and half frightened, prepared herself to sustain it with firmness. "I venture, therefore, my dear Miss Beverley, to speak to you upon this subject as a friend who will have patience to hear my perplexities. You see upon what they hang. Where the birth is such as Mortimer Delvile may claim, the fortune generally fails, and where the fortune is adequate to his expectations, the birth yet more frequently would disgrace us." Cecilia, astonished by this speech, and quite off her guard for momentary surprise, involuntarily raised her head to look at Mrs Delvile, in whose countenance she observed the most anxious concern, though her manner of speaking had seemed placid and composed. "Once," she continued, without appearing to remark the emotion of her auditor, "Mr Delvile thought of uniting him with his cousin Lady Honoria, but he never could endure the proposal, and who shall blame his repugnance? Her sister, indeed Lady Euphrasia, is much preferable. Her education has been better, and her fortune is much more considerable. At present, however, Mortimer seems greatly averse to her, and who has a right to be difficult if we deny it to him? Wonder, uncertainty, expectation, and suspense now all attacked Cecilia, and all harassed her with redoubled violence. Why she was called to this conference she knew not. The approbation she had thought so certain she doubted, and the proposal of assistance she had apprehended she ceased to think would be offered. Some fearful mystery, some cruel obscurity still clouded all her prospects, and not merely obstructed her view of the future, but made what was immediately before her gloomy and indistinct. The state of her mind seemed read by Mrs Delvile, who examined her with eyes of such penetrating keenness, that they rather made discoveries than inquiries. She was silent some time, and looked irresolute how to proceed, but at length she arose, and taking Cecilia by the hand, who almost drew it back from her dread of what would follow, she said, "I will torment you no more, my sweet young friend, with perplexities which you cannot relieve. This only I will say, and then drop the subject for ever. When my solicitude for Mortimer is removed, and he is established to the satisfaction of us all, no care will remain in the heart of his mother half so fervent, so anxious and sincere, as the disposal of my amiable Cecilia, for whose welfare and happiness my wishes are even maternal." She then kissed her glowing cheek, and perceiving her almost stupefied with astonishment, spared her any effort to speak by hastily leaving her in possession of her room. Undeceived in her expectations and chilled in her hopes, the heart of Cecilia no longer struggled to sustain its dignity, or conceal its tenderness. The conflict was at an end. Mrs Delvile had been open, though her son was mysterious, but in removing her doubts she had bereft her of her peace. She now found her own mistake in building upon her approbation. She saw nothing was less in her intentions, and that even when most ardent in affectionate regard, she separated her interest from that of her son, as if their union was a matter of utter impossibility. "Yet why," cried Cecilia, "oh why is it deemed so? That she loves me, she is ever eager to proclaim; that my fortune would be peculiarly useful, she makes not a secret; and that I at least should start no insuperable objection, she has, alas, but too obviously discovered. Has she doubts of her son? No, she has too much discernment. The father, then, the haughty, impracticable father, has destined him for some woman of rank, and will listen to no other alliance." This notion somewhat soothed her in the disappointment she suffered, yet to know herself betrayed to Mrs Delvile, and to see no other consequence ensue but that of exciting a tender compassion, which led her to discourage from benevolence hopes too high to be indulged, was a mortification so severe that it caused her a deeper depression of spirits than any other occurrence in her life had yet occasioned. "What Henrietta Belfield is to me," she cried, "I am to Mrs Delvile. But what in her is amiable and artless, in me is disgraceful and unworthy. And this is the situation which so long I have desired? This is the change of habitation which I thought would make me so happy? Oh, who can choose, who can judge for himself? Who can point out the road to his own felicity, or decide upon the spot where his peace will be ensured?" Still, however, she had something to do, some spirit to exert, and some fortitude to manifest. Mortimer, she was certain, suspected not his own power. His mother, she knew, was both too good and too wise to reveal it to him, and she determined, by caution and firmness upon his leave-taking and departure, to retrieve, if possible, that credit with Mrs Delvile which she feared her betrayed susceptibility had weakened. As soon, therefore, as she recovered from her consternation, she quitted Mrs Delvile's apartment, and seeking Lady Honoria herself, determined not to spend even a moment alone till Mortimer was gone, lest the sadness of her reflections should overpower her resolution, and give a melancholy to her air and manner which he might attribute, with but too much justice, to concern upon his own account. Let me know what you think. Good night.